Welcome to Voices of Adoption, where we share unique perspectives, actionable advice, and meaningful stories of birth parents, adoptees, adoptive families, and other members of the adoption community. I'm Donna Pope, Executive Director of Heart to Heart Adoptions.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam, founder and former CEO of Adoption.com.
Together, we've been part of thousands of adoption journeys over the past 25 years, and we're so glad you're here.
Let's begin today's conversation.
Welcome to Voices of Adoptions. I'm Donna Pope, and I'm here with Christine. And Christine, you're going to have to say your middle name because I'll never get it. Say your name.
Miskonoodinkwe-Smith.
Miskonoodinkwe. Okay. Well, welcome to having, we're so happy to have you here. And we're excited to hear your story because you were part of what they call the Sixties scoop. And so we're going to want to hear about that. And Christine is a proud Indigenous writer, editor, and survivor of the Sixties scoop, which was a dark chapter in Canadian history, during which Indigenous children were removed from their families and placed in non-Indigenous homes. And her work as an author and a storyteller has been deeply rooted in reclaiming identity, honing lived experience, and giving voice to the silent stories of Indigenous adoptees. Through her writing, Christine seeks to not only heal herself, but create collective healings for others who have walked in similar paths. That's kind of your mission and the purpose of what you're trying to do. So let's start out, Christine, if you're okay, just to tell us your story, where you were born, what happened, how you ended up to be an adoptee. Just tell us the story.
I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, to Anna Smith and William McKay. At the time of my adoption, I was 3 years old, and my sister, who's 10 months older than me, was 4. We got adopted together. We were taken from our mom, and we lived in a foster group home until our adoption, and then we were taken from Winnipeg and moved to Windsor, Ontario, which is like across from Detroit. And that adoption, unfortunately, was extremely abusive. My adoption ended up failing due to the abuse. I ended up in the child welfare system, or back to the child welfare system, and then I was separated from my sister for 7 years. I didn't get to see her until I was 17, and I had moved back from the little town that I lived in with my third foster home. It was to me.
No. Let me back up one step and ask you, why were you taken from your mom? Why were you and your sister taken?
We were taken because the child welfare system decided that my mom was not fit to take care of us, and at that time there was a ton of I can't remember the numbers, but there was a ton of Indigenous children taken from Winnipeg. And yeah, we were a part of that.
So the child welfare system came in and determined that your mom was not fit to raise you, and then took you. And you kind of think that, maybe your mom wasn't, all that everybody thinks a mom should be. That may have been a factor into it, but you also are thinking that maybe there was a bigger, broader kind of swooping, that they called it the scoop, a scooping up, and you were a part of that. Explain that just a little bit better.
Why they call it the 60 scoop is because what they did was they took Indigenous children away from their community. I mean, their families, community, their culture. It was basically continuation of residential schools, but in another form. A lot of times, the government decided that, okay, if they couldn't get the Indigenous people through the residential school system, they were going to get us from taking us away from our families and our culture and our communities.
Okay, so that confuses me. Why would they want to do that?
Because they technically didn't want us to be, they wanted us to assimilate and to be integrated into mainstream society. They didn't want us to be with our families, learning our language, learning our traditions. They basically stole that away when they scooped the Indigenous children away from their families.
Do you have any idea how many children that were affected by that?
I don't know the exact number, but I do know that it's quite a lot. It was thousands.
So you went into the foster care system, and then from the foster care system, you were put into an adoptive home. That adoption was disrupted, and you went back into the foster care system. Did you go into another adoptive home after that?
No, I ended up going through 3 foster homes.
Okay. And so you aged out of the foster care system.
Yes.
Okay. And so what happened after that?
After that, I stayed in Windsor as I tried to go to school for a while. I took journalism, and I would have graduated, but I got really sick at that time. I had anorexia, and I also had major depression and generalized anxiety disorder. And I ended up, the hospital in Windsor was basically a revolving door for me because I was there like constantly, like basically living there because they would keep me for 3 months at a time. And I did try at the time while I was in the hospital to talk to my ex-adoptive father, but that didn't work out either. And I had to stop contact. So while I was in and out of the hospital, my life was very up and down. I didn't know whether I was coming or going because sometimes the psychiatrist that I had at the time would just have me so doped up that I couldn't concentrate. My sister would have to help me walk across the street just because I was so doped up. And then at the time, during one of my visits, one of my stays at the hospital, I went to a eating disorder center in Windsor, and the worker that I met there, I'm still in contact with her, which is really cool. But she really helped me to see that I was more than what I believed I was at the time.
And you did start to heal.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How did that happen?
It came down to what at one point I was I told a social worker that I had that I wanted to get away from Windsor, and they got me into the eating disorder program here in Toronto, and the social worker was actually like he packed up my stuff and drove to Toronto, and I stayed in like a a residence. So what ended up happening was I stayed in Toronto, and it was in Toronto that's when I decided that I wanted to make something of myself. I wanted to be somebody, and um, being away from Windsor was what was beneficial to me.
So everyone's going to wonder this question. This was a tough time you went through. It was really hard. Um, and everyone's going to think, well, they should have just left her with her mom. How have you felt about that?
I ended up meeting my birth mom, so and she was like she had her own mental health issues. But for them to have put me back with my mom, I don't think I would have been where I am now today. I don't like to say that because my mom was an amazing person, and her side of the family stays in contact with me on Facebook and stuff like that.
So pulling you away from your mom was probably a good decision. So you started writing and you wrote a book called These Are the Stories. Tell us about that. And it's basically a memoir of the 60s scoop survivor. Tell us about the stories that you wrote.
Because of the Indigenous people don't uh, always tell stories in a linear way uh, like non-Indigenous people do. Um, I recognize that my stories all kind of ran within a circle, and I mentioned I would always come back to my mom or to somebody, to my sister or whoever I was writing about. But my memoir began when I was accepted into Banff at the for a writing residency, and I worked on a couple stories here and there while I was there, and then I put it away for a while because it was too hard for me to write. But I wrote different snapshots of my life that I thought was pertinent to my healing. Um, I wrote about how I felt when I escaped from my adoptive home. I wrote about how I felt when they told me that I wasn't wanted. Um, but I didn't want to be all like down and depressing, so I tried to put humor within my stories so that there was people so that people wouldn't like be like, oh gosh. So
Yeah, this is horrible.
yeah, so I just like different things. Like I was like one story I wrote I was like, oh, I was balancing on the stairwell, and I was like, oh, I'm an acrobat because I was, just something like that. Or when I was traveling to Winnipeg, I wanted to get the heck off the plane because I was tired of sitting on the plane, that kind of thing. Just little tidbits of humor, just like to help round it out, I guess. I also wrote about, I think the big turnaround in my healing was when my sister uh, gave birth to her daughter. Um, her daughter, me, it's like a daughter to me. Um, well, like the daughter I never had, I mean. And I witnessed her birth, and I for me that was a powerful thing, and it made me decide that okay, I want to get better because I wanted to be around for her.
And so what did you do to go about doing that, getting better?
I got myself into therapy. Um, I well, I did. I when I moved to Toronto, I ended up continuing therapy outside of after I finished the eating disorder program with a psychiatrist, and like I still see her. Um, it's been like over 20 years now. Um, but I took part in group therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy. I did art therapy, um, stuff like that. And I had a couple workers that really helped me to get out and to be in the community, um, doing like they taught me how to grocery shop. They taught me how to try to keep me out of budget. Um, different things like that. They were just a very they were like a general support system for me, and that from that upon um, the support that they gave me uh, onto, I guess, everything else I did in my life.
No, that sounds good. And how have you gotten feedback on your memoirs?
Everybody tells me how powerful it is. It's really great, that kind of thing. But I take in the accolades, but I don't like I'm not the type of person to be like, oh yeah, look at me, I wrote a book. I that kind of so yeah, I'm pretty I guess you could say I'm pretty humble about it. I just don't like I don't know. I don't feel comfortable like saying, oh my gosh.
Well, I think you should be proud of it. I think you should be proud. I, so I looked up the 60 scoop. It says that it is estimated that a total of 20,000 Indigenous children were taken from their family and fostered or adopted out primarily to white middle class families. Was your adoptive family a white middle class family?
Yes, my adoptive parents were he was a doctor and his wife was stay-at-home mom.
Okay. And your sister stayed with them until she was an adult, I'm assuming. And does she feel okay that that adoption went well for her?
No, she's got her own trauma from that, but she's not the type of person that really speaks about it. Um, and that can be a sticking point between me and her because I'm all about trying to talk about it or my whatever I do, like my art or whatever, um, is around all that, like my writing, my blog, that kind of stuff. And she's not like that. She's totally different.
Yeah. She doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, and yeah, there's just we're on different paths, but we're still close. So.
It says that despite the name referring to the 1960s, the 60s scoop began in the mid to late 1950s and persisted into the 1980s. So quite a period of time. And what caused it to stop?
It actually really hasn't stopped because now there's what they call millennial scoop, and that's children. I mean, adoptees getting their kids taken away. Um, it's just the Canadian government. They're just complicit in genocide, in the genocide of Indigenous people.
It says that children were forcibly apprehended from native lands and community without knowledge or consent from their families or tribes. Siblings were often intentionally sent to different regions in order to eliminate any form of communication. That didn't happen with you. But it also says the residential schools push for the transition of culture from children by feeding them information that aligns with their policies, basically as it would kill the Indian in the child. That was sort of the goal. How's that for you, the thought of killing the Indian in you?
It makes me extremely angry because I remember when I was a kid and I faced racism all the time. I was primarily in a white neighborhood, and my sister and I were the only natives or First Nations people in the neighborhood. And I remember as young as 5 years old wanting to literally paint myself white. And that took years for me to get away from thinking like that.
Feels like a lot of racism. Do you think that it is, you said that now it continues on. Do you think it is better or just as bad as it was then?
I think it's just as bad because the Canadian government did apologize, but they haven't, words mean nothing if there's no action after you've said them. And they still fight us when we bring up the issues that are happening on the reserves and happening even in urban cities. So it's very it's difficult to be not angry with the government because of how they've treated us for so long.
Interesting. And so I understand that the Native American tribes, you call them first tribes. Tell me about that.
It depends on the area you're from. In the States, they usually say Native American. In Canada, we say Indigenous, or we say First Nations, or
First Nations.
Yeah.
So I think the argument would be that life on the reservation wasn't a very good life, and so kind of saving the kids. How would you counter that?
I think that given the right tools to care for their families, and at the time that I was taken, I mean, given the right tools, they would have we could have stayed with their parents if they had given us a chance.
What tools would you recommend?
Just listening, letting us talk, letting us do what we do, which is like our traditions. They allow for, families are very extended. So if you, I'm not let me see, if I have a cousin who's actually told me about how her kids visit everybody's cousins or I don't know. I really don't know. It's just because I don't live on the reserve. I've always been in the urbans.
Would you want to go to the reservation?
I've gone and visited my reserve, but I don't think I could stay there because I'm so used to the city. And I also don't drive, and a lot of the land on the reserve, you have to drive. Um, it's um, but it's still, like a lot of some people really like the reserve, and others just move away from the reserve, but they go back and forth from the city to the reserves.
One of the major issues, well, a major issue in the world of adoption is what's called the Indian Child Welfare Act. Now, that's in the States. I don't know if there's something comparable to that in Canada. Is there?
It's the Indian Act.
It's the Indian Act. And the philosophy behind the Indian Act or the Indian Child Welfare Act is that the tribe should have a say in whether or not the child is able to be adopted. Is that the case with the Indian Act?
The Indian Act actually stops us from doing what we would normally do.
No, I know the Indian Child Welfare Act, and one of the challenges that a lot of women that I work with have it that are Native American, and maybe they do live on the reservation, and maybe they do want to make an adoption plan. And sometimes, like you've said, sometimes they're stopped from doing that. Um, and so it seems that we've kind of gone one way or the other, where with the 60s scoop, there was taking children away from the tribe and taking them and integrating them in with middle class white society. And people go, no, 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 that's not right. That's not the thing to do. And then it's kind of gone to, well, you can't place a child with a non-Native American family without the permission of the tribe. I've worked with a lot of women who have said, well, shouldn't it be my choice as to whether or not I can do that? And they want the freedom to choose, even if it may not be consistent with their tribe. How do you feel about that?
I totally agree with them. We should be able to make choices just like anybody else in society. Just because our skin color is different or we're First Nations, that kind of thing, we shouldn't have to be told that no, you can't keep your child or taking them away. If that takes away
from someone's agency or their freedom of choice.
Yeah, freedom of choice. Yeah, that's what I was was trying to. Freedom of choice, yes, because like my mom, I know my mom looked for my sister and I have two brothers. Looked for us for years, and I can't even imagine how she felt when she was a residential school survivor. Then her children were taken. All four of her children were taken away, and it was no wonder that she struggled the way that she did. And she passed about 8 years ago, and that's always been extremely difficult for me because I'm technically an orphan now. I don't have any parents. So but I learned so much from her while she was here, while she was alive, I mean.
So you were able to reunite with your mom and be able to spend time with her even after you had aged out of the foster care system.
Yeah, because I actively looked for her. It was actually when I was in college. that I asked the children's aid. This was before I aged up with children's aid. They started the process of helping me to go on the adoption registry to help, so that if my mom was looking for me, she could find me. And it turns out that the day after, or a week after I had put my name on the adoption registry, she put her name on it.
Oh my.
And I like my very first meeting with her was like extremely powerful. Because like I got off the bus and she was in the bus station in Winnipeg with the repatriation worker, and she just burst into tears and I was like, oh my God, I actually look like somebody.
That biological connection. I look like somebody. I'm connected to somebody.
Yeah. So I felt that connection. It was very strong. I mean, there were some things that she couldn't do, but
But she's still your mom.
she was still my mom, and she still is my mom. And yeah, I wouldn't take that experience away for anything. So
Very good. So you would if you were to advise, let's say you could advise the government, and you wanted to help them understand how to best treat Indigenous people and best care for their children, what advice might you give?
I would tell them that they need to do more than just talk about what they're going to do, or taking us to court when there's certain issues that are brought to court. They need to listen and need to act, and they need to learn that we're just like everybody else. We're humans. We're just because our skin color is different does not mean that they have to treat us differently. Because through that's how the Indian Act was put into place. And it's our land, and we're walking around with a status card, and it's saying, "Oh, I'm an Indian," and that's wrong. I don't agree with that at all. Like, why are we on our own land carrying a card stating that we're Canadian citizens, Canadian Indians? I mean, and so that's another thing. They need to, I guess they would just need to give us freedom of choice.
I like that. What would you recommend to adoptive families that may adopt a child that was from the First Nations?
Their home open to, or their minds open to helping their children learn their culture, learn their language, take them to events, like powwows, that kind of thing. Because what we need are allies. We don't need people to totally shut us down.
Yeah. And then finally, what would you advise other people like yourself who maybe got caught up in this 60s scoop and maybe now don't feel fully connected with their native language or cultures or anything? What would you advise them?
I would tell them they're not alone. There's thousands of us out there. And we just need to connect, learn from each other, help each other heal.
No, I love that. I love that. Christine, thank you so much for being a part of this, and we look forward to talking with you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Adoption. I'm Donna Pope.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam. Every voice in the adoption triad deserves to be heard and understood.
Visit voicesofadoption.org to subscribe and access additional resources. And then join us next time as we continue to build bridges through conversation.